The dust cloud trailing behind the stagecoach obscured the tears streaming down Penelope Davis's face as it rattled into Willow Creek's ramshackle station on a scorching August afternoon in 1876. Her gloved fingers clutched a crumpled letter, the final correspondence from her deceased father and her only connection to the life she'd left behind in Boston. "Final stop, Willow Creek," the driver bellowed, his voice as rough as the terrain they'd traversed for days. Penelope gathered her skirts, smoothed her travel-worn dress, and waited as the other passengers disembarked before attempting to step down. Her boots had barely touched the weathered wooden platform when she stumbled, catching herself just before falling face first into the dirt. A raucous laugh erupted from a group of men lounging against the station wall. "Looks like the city girl's already having trouble standing on solid ground," one called out, his tobacco-stained teeth visible beneath his unkempt mustache. "Bet she won't last a week out here," another added, nudging his companion with an elbow. Penelope straightened her spine, determined not to let these strangers see how deeply their words cut. She'd endured worse in the weeks since her father's passing, the cruel whispers at his funeral, the banker's smug expression as he informed her of the debts that would claim her childhood home, the pitying looks from former friends as she sold her belongings. But when she turned to retrieve her trunk and found it had been tossed carelessly onto the platform, something inside her broke. The clasp had come undone, spilling her few remaining possessions into the dust books, a silver-backed hairbrush that had belonged to her mother and the carefully wrapped portrait of her parents on their wedding day. Penelope fell to her knees, desperately trying to gather her scattered belongings before they could be further damaged. The tears she'd fought to contain now flowed freely, and the men's laughter grew louder. "Look at her bawling like a child," one of them jeered. "The West ain't no place for delicate flowers. Maybe she should have stayed where she belonged," another added, spitting a stream of tobacco juice that narrowly missed her skirts. Penelope's hands trembled as she attempted to refold a dress. She had nowhere to go, no one expecting her, and only enough money for a few nights' lodging while she searched for work. The enormity of her situation crashed over her like a wave, threatening to drown her completely. Then a shadow fell across her, blocking the harsh afternoon sun. A pair of worn leather boots appeared in her line of vision, followed by strong, tanned hands that began carefully collecting her belongings. "That's enough out of all of you," a deep voice commanded, authority resonating in every word. "Unless you're looking for trouble." The laughter died immediately. Penelope looked up through tear-blurred vision at the tall figure now crouched beside her. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a well-worn Stetson, but she could make out a strong jaw lined with several days' stubble and eyes the color of a storm-darkened sky. "These items are important to you," he said, not a question but a statement as he carefully wrapped the portrait in her shawl before placing it back in the trunk. His movements were surprisingly gentle for hands that bore the calluses of hard labor. When every last item had been collected, he secured the trunk's clasp and rose to his feet in one fluid motion. With seemingly effortless strength, he lifted the heavy trunk as though it weighed nothing. "You're safe now, madam," he said, extending his free hand to help her up. "Where were you planning to stay?" Penelope accepted his help, noticing how her small hand disappeared completely in his. I don't know," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have a letter for the schoolteacher position, but I don't know if they've filled it yet." A ghost of a smile flickered across his face. "Mrs. Henderson at the boarding house will set you up proper until you get settled. I'll walk you there." He nodded toward the group of men who had fallen silent and were now finding reasons to look anywhere but at them. "Don't mind those fools. They forget their mothers were once newcomers too." As they walked away from the station, Penelope found her voice. "Thank you, Mr. Zachary Donovan," he replied. "Most folks just call me Zach. I'm Penelope Davis. I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Donovan." "Zach," he corrected gently. "And there's no need for thanks. Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Davis." The afternoon sun cast long shadows as they made their way down the town's main street. Willow Creek was smaller than Penelope had imagined, a single thoroughfare lined with false-fronted buildings, a general store, saloon, and a small white church at the far end. Despite its modest size, it bustled with activity as merchants closed up for the day and ranch hands rode in for evening entertainment. "What brings you to Willow Creek?" Zach asked as they sidestepped a water trough where several horses drank deeply. "My father passed away last month." "There was nothing left for me in Boston," she replied, surprised by her candor with this stranger. "I saw an advertisement for a schoolteacher position and used the last of my savings for the journey." Zach nodded, his expression softening. "I'm sorry about your father. Thank you." Penelope studied him as they walked. Despite his rugged appearance and the holstered revolver at his hip, there was something undeniably gentle about Zachary Donovan. "Have you lived here long?" "Born and raised on a ranch about 5 miles outside town." "My father started it after the war, built it up from nothing." Pride colored his voice. "It's mine now." They arrived at a 2-story clapboard house with a neat front porch adorned with potted geraniums. A hand-painted sign identified it as Henderson's boarding house. Before Zach could knock, the door swung open to reveal a plump, silver-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Zachary Donovan, what brings you to town on a Tuesday?" "Mrs. Henderson, this is Miss Penelope Davis. She's here about the teaching position and needs lodging." The woman's face brightened. "Oh, thank heavens. We've been praying someone would answer that advertisement. The children have been running wild since Miss Winters eloped with that cattle buyer." She ushered Penelope inside. "You come right in, dear. You must be exhausted from your journey." Zach set the trunk down in the entry hall. "I'll leave you ladies to get acquainted." "Wait," Penelope said, suddenly reluctant to see him go. "I don't know how to thank you." "No thanks needed." His eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "I'll check in tomorrow, make sure you're settling in." With a tip of his hat, he was gone, leaving Penelope with the strange sensation that something significant had just occurred. Mrs. Henderson showed Penelope to a small but clean room on the second floor. "Dinner's at 6 sharp," she explained. "The bathroom's at the end of the hall. We've got running water, which is more than most can say in these parts. The school board will want to meet you tomorrow morning, I expect." Left alone, Penelope sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. Despite the day's rough beginning, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps Willow Creek would become the fresh start she desperately needed. The following morning, after a breakfast of hot biscuits and strong coffee, Mrs. Henderson directed Penelope to the town hall where the school board would be meeting. Dressed in her best remaining outfit, a navy blue dress with modest lace trim, Penelope clutched her teaching credentials and letters of recommendation. The board consisted of 3 stern-faced men and 1 woman who scrutinized her with undisguised curiosity. Their questions were direct, probing not only her educational qualifications, but her character and ability to withstand frontier hardships. "Our last teacher lasted less than 6 months, explained Mr. Thornton, the board's chairman. "This ain't Boston, Miss Davis. The winters are harsh, the work is demanding, and the children some haven't had much schooling at all." "I understand," Penelope replied, meeting his gaze. "I'm not afraid of hard work, sir. My father always said education is the greatest gift we can give the next generation. I intend to honor his memory by being the best teacher I can be." The woman, Mrs. Wright, nodded approvingly. "Well said, Miss Davis." After a brief deliberation, they offered her the position, along with use of the small cabin behind the schoolhouse. Her duties would begin the following Monday, giving her time to prepare lessons and settle into her new home. As she stepped out into the bright sunshine, relief and excitement mingling in her chest, Penelope nearly collided with Zach Donovan. "Good news," he asked, noting her smile. "I got the position," she confirmed. "I start Monday, congratulations." He fell into step beside her. "I came to see if you'd like a tour of the town, since you'll be calling at home now." Penelope hesitated only briefly before accepting. Over the next 2 hours, Zach introduced her to Willow Creek's resident Mr. Parker at the general store, who promised to order any books she might need for the school doctor. Coleman, whose wife immediately invited Penelope to Sunday dinner, and countless others who welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth. "People are friendlier than I expected," she admitted as they paused outside the blacksmith shop. "Small towns depend on newcomers to survive," Zach explained. "Besides, everyone's been worried about the school. 23 children need teaching and most parents aren't equipped to do it themselves." 23. Penelope's eyes widened. That's more than I anticipated. Ages 6 to 16, some who have never set foot in a schoolhouse before. He smiled at her expression. Having second thoughts? Not at all, she replied, straightening her shoulders, just mentally rearranging my lesson plans. As the week progressed, Penelope settled into Willow Creek's rhythms. She moved into the teacher's cabin, a simple one-room structure with a small kitchen, bedroom area, and a front porch that faced the rising sun. The school board had arranged for basic supplies, and the townspeople generously contributed what else she might need. Mrs. Henderson provided linens, the blacksmith's wife brought curtains, and other families contributed furniture, dishes, and pantry staples. Zach appeared regularly, sometimes bringing fresh vegetables from his ranch's garden or offering to fix the cabin's leaky roof. His visits became the highlight of Penelope's days, though she tried not to dwell on the warmth that spread through her whenever he was near. On Sunday, Penelope attended services at the small white church and was formally introduced to the congregation. After the service, as families gathered outside to socialize, she found herself surrounded by curious children, her future pupils, each one eager to assess their new teacher. "Miss Davis, do you know multiplication?" asked a freckle-faced boy of about 8. "I certainly do," she assured him. "Can you shoot a gun?" questioned another boy, slightly older. Before she could answer, Zach appeared at her side. "Miss Davis isn't here to teach you how to shoot, Jimmy Thompson. She's here to make sure you learn enough so you don't grow up to be as foolish as your father." The children giggled and the tension broke. As they dispersed to rejoin their parents, Zach offered Penelope his arm. "Would you allow me to escort you to dinner at the Colemans? Their place is a fair walk from here." She accepted, aware of the speculative glances from the townspeople as they departed together. By unspoken agreement, they took a longer route that allowed them to walk without the scrutiny of others. "Are you nervous about tomorrow?" Zach asked. "A little," she admitted. "I want to make a good impression." "You already have," he assured her. "Just be yourself." The Coleman's home was filled with laughter and conversation. Dr. Coleman regaled them with stories of frontier medicine, while his wife Martha served a meal that put Mrs. Henderson's considerable cooking skills to shame. As the evening drew to a close, Zach insisted on walking Penelope home. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast sky like diamonds on black velvet. "It's beautiful," Penelope breathed, pausing to gaze upward. "I've never seen so many stars." "One advantage of being far from city lights," Zach said, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "There's a lot of beauty out here if you know where to look." When his eyes met hers, Penelope felt a jolt of awareness that left her momentarily breathless. He seemed about to say something more, but instead cleared his throat and offered his arm again. At her cabin door, Penelope turned to thank him for the evening. "I'll be by tomorrow after school," he said, "to see how your first day went." "I'd like that," she replied softly. His smile was gentle in the moonlight. "Good night, Miss Davis. Good night, Mr. Donovan." Penelope's first day as Willow Creek schoolteacher was both exhilarating and exhausting. The children ranged widely in age and abilities. Some could barely write their names, while others had mastered basic arithmetic and grammar. By day's end, her voice was hoarse from constant instruction, and her skirts were dust-covered from moving among the rows of desks. True to his word, Zach arrived as the last students departed. He found her at her desk, hair escaping its pins, surrounded by papers. "That bad?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. Penelope looked up, a tired smile crossing her face. "Challenging, but not bad. They're good children, just enthusiastic. I brought something that might help." He set a small crate on her desk. Inside were apples, a jar of honey, and a book titled Teaching on the Frontier: Practical Methods for Rural Educators. "Where did you find this?" she asked, running her fingers over the book's leather cover. "Ordered it from Denver when I heard you were coming. It arrived on today's stage." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her deeply. "Thank you, Zach. Truly, my pleasure. Now, how about I walk you home? You look like you could use some rest." As September gave way to October, Penelope found herself settling into a comfortable routine. The school days grew more manageable as she developed systems that worked for her diverse group of students. The older children helped the younger ones, and she organized them by ability rather than age for certain subjects. Zach continued to visit regularly, sometimes joining her for supper or bringing small gifts, wildflowers he'd picked on the ride to town, a handcrafted bookshelf for her growing collection of teaching materials, fresh eggs from his ranch's chickens. Penelope found herself looking forward to these visits with an anticipation that both thrilled and alarmed her. On a crisp Saturday morning, Zach arrived with his wagon. "I thought you might like to see a bit more of the territory," he explained, "if you're not too busy." Penelope eagerly accepted, packing a simple lunch and donning her warmest shawl against the autumn breeze. As they left town behind, the landscape opened before them, rolling hills dotted with pine and oak trees, their leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and crimson. "It's breathtaking," Penelope said as Zach guided the wagon along a well-worn trail. "Wait until you see what I have to show you," he replied with a mysterious smile. After an hour's ride, they reached a high meadow overlooking a winding river valley. The vista stretched for miles, mountains rising in the distance against a clear blue sky. "This is my favorite place," Zach said as he helped her down from the wagon. "I come here when I need to think or when the ranch responsibilities get too heavy." They spread a blanket in a sunny spot sheltered from the wind and shared the simple lunch Penelope had packed. The conversation flowed easily between them, covering childhood memories, favorite books, and dreams for the future. "Why did you never marry?" Penelope asked, then immediately regretted the personal nature of the question. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." Zach didn't seem offended. "I came close once, about 5 years ago. Elizabeth was a rancher's daughter from the next county. We were courting, planning a spring wedding when influenza swept through. She didn't survive." His voice was steady, but Penelope could hear the old pain beneath the words. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, laying her hand on his. He turned his palm up, gently curling his fingers around hers. "Life out here is beautiful but harsh. It teaches you to cherish what you have while you have it." His eyes met hers. "What about you? No suitors back in Boston?" Penelope shook her head. "My father was ill for many years before he passed. I was his caretaker. There wasn't much time for socializing." "You sacrificed a lot for him." "He would have done the same for me," she said simply. As the afternoon waned, they reluctantly packed up to return to town. On the journey back, Penelope found herself sitting closer to Zach than was strictly proper, drawn to his warmth and solid presence. When they reached her cabin, Zach hesitated before helping her down. "There's a harvest dance next Saturday at the Peterson barn," he said. "Would you do me the honor of attending with me?" Her heart leaped at the invitation. "I'd be delighted." His smile lit his entire face. "I'll call for you at 6. The week leading up to the dance passed in a blur of anticipation. Penelope fretted over her limited wardrobe until Martha Coleman arrived at her door with a beautiful emerald green dress. "It was my daughter's before she moved to California," Martha explained. "It might need taking in, but the color will suit your complexion beautifully." On the night of the dance, Penelope surveyed her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The dress fit perfectly after minor alterations, its rich color complementing her auburn hair, which she'd arranged in a simple upswept style adorned with a mother-of-pearl comb borrowed from Mrs. Henderson. Zach arrived promptly at 6, looking handsome in a clean white shirt, black vest, and his best denims. His expression when she opened the door made Penelope blush to the roots of her hair. "You look beautiful," he said, his voice rough with admiration. "Thank you, you're quite handsome yourself." The Peterson barn had been transformed with lanterns, autumn decorations, and tables laden with food. A small band played lively tunes as couples whirled around the makeshift dance floor. As they entered, Penelope was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Evidently, Zachary Donovan escorting the new schoolteacher was a matter of significant interest to the community. "Don't mind them," Zach murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "They're just not used to seeing me with such a beautiful woman." The evening passed in a delightful blur of dancing, laughter, and conversation. Zach proved to be an excellent dancer, guiding her confidently through waltzes and lively reels. When they stepped outside to cool off after a particularly energetic dance, they found themselves alone in the Petersons' orchard, the music a distant accompaniment to the night sounds. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Zach asked, his voice low. Very much, Penelope replied, breathless from the dancing and his proximity. I'm glad you came to Willow Creek, he said, taking her hand, even if the circumstances that brought you here were painful. So am I, she whispered. When he bent his head to kiss her, it felt as natural as breathing. His lips were gentle against hers, the kiss sweet and unhurried. Penelope found herself responding with a fervor that would have shocked her Boston acquaintances, her hands moving to his shoulders as his arms encircled her waist. When they finally parted, both were breathing rapidly. I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you at the station, Zach admitted, his forehead resting against hers. I'm glad you waited until now, Penelope replied with a small laugh. I was a mess that day. You were beautiful, he countered. Brave and determined, even when those fools were mocking you. They returned to the dance with secret smiles, both aware that something significant had shifted between them. As Zach escorted her home later that night, they walked slowly, reluctant for the evening to end. At her door, he kissed her again, more deeply this time. May I call on you properly tomorrow? He asked. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, she replied, her heart full to bursting. The courtship of Zachary Donovan and Penelope Davis became the talk of Willow Creek. He rode into town almost daily, often bringing small tokens of affection, wildflowers in spring, ripe berries in summer. They attended church together, shared Sunday dinners with friends, and spent long evenings on her porch swing talking about everything and nothing. Winter arrived with a vengeance in late November, bringing heavy snows that sometimes made the journey from his ranch to town impossible. On those days, Penelope found herself watching the road anxiously, relief flooding through her when his familiar figure eventually appeared. One such day, as a blizzard raged outside, Penelope was startled by a pounding on her door. She opened it to find Zach, half frozen and covered in snow. "What are you doing here?" she exclaimed, pulling him inside. "You could have frozen to death, couldn't stay away," he admitted, allowing her to help him remove his ice-crusted coat. "I was worried about you. I'm perfectly fine. The school board canceled classes and I have plenty of firewood and supplies." She pushed him into the chair nearest the stove and busied herself making coffee. "It's you I'm worried about now. How will you get back to the ranch in this weather?" "I won't," he said simply. "Not until it passes. I'll stay at the boarding house." But as the afternoon wore on, the storm intensified. When Zach finally prepared to leave for the boarding house, they opened the door to find drifts nearly as tall as Penelope. "You can't go out in that," she said, closing the door firmly. Zach looked uncomfortable. "Penelope, if I stay here, people will talk," she finished for him. "They're already talking. I stopped caring what people think when I buried my father and sold everything I owned to come west." She took his hands in hers. "Stay, please. I'd rather face gossip than lose you to a blizzard." He searched her face, then nodded slowly. "I'll sleep by the stove." They passed the evening in comfortable domesticity, sharing a simple meal and reading aloud to each other from her small collection of books. When it came time to retire, Zach made a pallet near the stove while Penelope retreated behind the privacy screen to her bed. Despite the impropriety of their situation, Penelope felt utterly safe and strangely more at peace than she had in years. "Good night, Zach," she called softly. "Good night, Penny," he replied, using the nickname he'd recently begun calling her in private moments. Morning revealed a transformed world, everything blanketed in pristine white. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline blue sky and temperatures cold enough to freeze breath. Zach departed early, promising to return once he'd checked on his ranch and animals. 3 days later, he appeared at the schoolhouse just as classes were ending. His expression was unusually serious as he asked if they could talk privately. "Is something wrong?" Penelope asked as the last student departed. "Not wrong," he said, taking her hands in his. "But I need to speak with you about something important." Her heart raced as he led her to her desk and gently urged her to sit. Then, to her astonishment, he knelt before her. "Penelope Davis, I've loved you since the moment I saw you gathering your belongings at that station. You were so brave, so determined, even with tears on your face." His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Every day since then, I've found new reasons to love you. Your kindness to the children, your strength in facing a new life, your laughter." He paused, swallowing hard. I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but out here, life doesn't always give us the luxury of time. I want to spend whatever years I have with you by my side." From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet pouch. Inside was a ring, a delicate gold band set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She made me promise to give it only to the woman who captured my heart completely." His eyes, so steady and sure, held hers. "Will you marry me, Penny? Will you build a life with me, share my home, perhaps someday raise children together?" Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, but unlike those she'd shed at the station months before, these were born of joy. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." The ring fit perfectly, as though it had been made for her hand. When he rose to kiss her, Penelope felt as though her heart might burst from happiness. They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church, with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Henderson cried openly through the ceremony, while Dr. and Mrs. Coleman beamed like proud parents. Even the men who had mocked Penelope on her arrival offered sheepish congratulations at the reception. As Zach helped her into the wagon that would take them to their new life together at the Donovan Ranch, Penelope looked back at the town that had become her home in such a short time. From desperate tears at the station to a bride's joy, the journey had been unexpected but perfect in its way. "Ready, Mrs. Donovan?" Zach asked, his smile warming her more effectively than the winter sun. "Ready," she confirmed, tucking her hand into his. As the wagon pulled away amid cheers and well wishes, Penelope silently thanked whatever twist of fate had brought her west to Willow Creek, and to the man who had first lifted her trunk and promised her safety, never knowing he was also offering her a love beyond anything she could have imagined. Years later, when their children asked how they met, Zach would always begin the story the same way. "I saw your mother crying at the station, with mean-spirited fools mocking her tears, and I knew right then she was the strongest, most beautiful woman I'd ever laid eyes on." And Penelope would smile, remembering how those first words, "You're safe now," had proven true in ways neither of them could have foreseen, as they built a life filled with love, laughter, and the kind of happiness that comes from finding home in another person's heart.